right, so again, we're recording the session. Want to welcome everyone to our first Tech Talks. Most of you know me, but I'm Larry Prust, the Managing Director of our Digital Advisory Services, and I work for Strategic Resource Management, a payments advisory vendor management firm serving financial services. The goal of this session and our ongoing series is going to be to highlight financial technologies that are applicable to traditional finance. We will hold this forum every other week on Thursdays from 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock Eastern Time. And with that, I'd like to introduce Connor Heaton. Connor is SRM's Vice President of AI and Intelligence Automation. He's been working with various forms of AI for about 6 years, starting at Deloitte's Federal Automation practice and continuing through his time here at SRM. His focus is on helping clients leverage innovation and technology for strategic gain. So with that, I will hand it over to Connor and appreciate everyone joining us today.
Thanks, Larry, and good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'll be talking about the implications of artificial intelligence and specifically large language models, or LLMs, for banks and credit unions. For those not already aware, large language model is the generic term for AI platforms like OpenAI's ChatGPT, Google's Bard, or Meta's Llama. I'll be going over several topics, including the pace of AI advancement, what LLMs are, what they can do, their risks and limits, emerging use cases for banks and credit unions, and if there's any time left, I may talk a little bit about my predictions for the future. If you have any questions during the course of the presentation, feel free to raise your hand in Teams or post your question in the chat, and we'll get to it at an appropriate time. So to lead off, as an illustration of some of the latest advances in AI technology, I'd like to hand over to an AI imitation of Morgan Freeman to say a few words about the field.
Thanks, Connor, and hello, everyone. I'm Morgan Freeman. Well, technically, I am an AI-generated likeness of him. I am here today to talk to you about the progression of artificial intelligence, or AI. The history of AI for our purposes starts with the history of computing, from the most basic and fundamental computing machines, assisting with calculation and tabulation, through to the astonishing advances we're seeing today in autonomous agents, generative AI, and general-purpose intelligence. The speed of advancement in the field is accelerating. As AI systems become more capable and ubiquitous, they will have profound impacts on society and humanity and challenge our understanding of ourselves as intelligent beings. I hope you enjoyed this brief introduction. I will now cede the floor to Connor to elaborate further.
So we used freely available AI tools, both to generate the script for that section and to have the AI facsimile deliver it. And what's crazy about this is that I could have almost as easily generated the script as poetry and had the Morgan Freeman voice print deliver it in German or sing it. Some of you may have seen the music industry news lately about AI voice prints of Kanye West and Drake singing songs like Call Me Maybe and other similar AI-enabled covers. And this is just one domain where there's been shocking improvements in ease and accessibility of use of AI tools. And one other thing I'd like to expand on from what the Morgan Freeman voice print went over, and on this slide, is the increasing rate of progress. Measuring progress is always difficult to do objectively, but many experts argue that the pace of AI progress is actually increasing exponentially. And it's in some ways difficult to overstate just how big the potential impact to banking and indeed to most knowledge work-centric industries is. Probably the most common analogy that I've heard made for things like ChatGPT is to the invention of the computer. And while it may be difficult to imagine a step change as foundational as the computer, I think the implications are apt. Large language models are something which, with time, will permeate virtually every industry, transforming it to a greater or lesser degree and providing a new architecture upon which tens of thousands of new technologies will be built. And the adoption curve for large language models and the pace of innovation on top of them is many, many times faster than that of computers. Many of you may have heard that OpenAI's ChatGPT had the fastest adoption of any consumer software ever. 1 million users in 5 days after launch, which for perspective, it took Facebook 10 months and Netflix 3 years. It reached 100 million users in 2 months, and that's without significant marketing behind it. And then as of March of this year, in less than 6 months, it hit 1 billion users. So the growth curve is really tremendous. And I hear from clients all the time that it's been almost impossible to keep up with all of the recent trends in retail banking. UX modernization, online banking, digital currencies, remote work, and so forth. And the pace of change is only likely to accelerate as the impact of AI expands. With that said, it's important to note that even if AI progresses exponentially in capabilities, human products, processes, and institutions won't. Even if we're seeing thousands of new startups and products every week, it will still take time for the innovations which are already implemented in Silicon Valley to similarly transform the rest of the marketplace. So I'll take a quick pause here for any questions on what I've covered so far.
And feel free to put anything in the chat. I'll monitor the chat and I can capture questions that way as well.
All right, we'll keep driving forward. So I'd like to zoom out for a moment for anyone who's less familiar with the field of AI. What does artificial intelligence really mean when we see it used in tech news and by software vendors? And really, it's a very loaded term. It refers to a wide variety of different solutions. The common factor which makes these solutions AI is having some component which uses machine learning, which is to say isn't rigidly programmed by humans, but instead looks at data in order to configure its own function as part of it. And so in this way, you can think of AI almost as an element of infrastructure. It's more about how a piece of software functions than exactly what it does. And this graphic that I have up shows a selection of AI-enabled technologies and capabilities arranged roughly on a spectrum of maturity. I won't go into great depth here, but in short, rules-based automation, intelligent automation, and narrow AI have been around in various forms for many years. The most recent advancements involve AI becoming more general, more able to mimic human intelligence effectively using a single framework rather than a patchwork of specialized solutions. And the type of AI getting the most attention and investment right now is large language models, as I've talked about, also sometimes referred to as generative AI. And large language models, which you've likely heard about mostly in the context of individual solutions like ChatGPT, are AI systems which are designed to understand and generate human language. For example, to write a news article or generate a report, or per our conversation while we were getting ready for this talk, to write jokes that you can tell to an audience as you're waiting for a meeting to start. But recent solutions have proven the capabilities of LLMs to be much broader, extending into analysis, data search, summary, synthesis, planning, and even robotics. The demonstration I gave earlier with AI Morgan Freeman should serve as an illustration of how many seemingly unrelated domains this technology has impacted. I have up on screen a few other examples of the astonishing performance of LLMs, from providing professional level advice on process improvement, scoring highly on a wide variety of knowledge and capability assessments, things like the uniform bar exam for law, medical assessments, AP tests, SAT tests, and interpreting and extrapolating from visual data. On the right, it's evaluating what ingredients are in the picture and then providing a set of recipes that could be made with those ingredients, which is a really leaps and bounds ahead of sort of where AI was even just a year and a half ago. And recently, LLMs have even been used to plan and execute courses of action for physical robots based on their sensor inputs, which enables highly adaptive behavior without explicit programming, which may not sound that impressive, just sort of spoken out loud, but the semantic understanding of and response to a robot's environment and the deeply flexible planning, reasoning, and problem-solving capabilities which LLMs enable represent a huge leap forward and are something which few people, even few researchers, I would hazard, ever expected large language models to be able to do. With all of that said, the capabilities of large language models aren't magic, as much as they may seem like it sometimes. Fundamentally, LLMs are pattern matching and predicting what they should output based on the data used to train them, and generating that output from whole cloth. They're not searching a database and returning the same value every time. This means that sometimes they'll return plausible sounding but fully or partially false information, bad advice, incorrect interpretations, and other outputs which humans would consider clearly incorrect for the task in question. OpenAI has termed these outputs hallucinations, but they're really just a consequence of how the technology works. And what I have up on this slide is just a couple of screenshots of different GPT hallucinations and the tool zone explanation of why it will commit errors like fabricating sports records or scientific citations. As you might imagine, this behavior poses regulatory compliance risks and reputational risks and makes it critical to have some amount of expert oversight, at least for most use cases. There are also data privacy and security risks. OpenAI recently expanded the privacy protections it offers even to unpaid users, but other private LLMs like Bard haven't universally followed, nor have the hundreds of new tools that are being built on top of LLMs. And that's important because LLMs will be embedded in so many of these solutions and processes that we use daily in the future that setting data security standards for both employees and vendors needs to be a priority for virtually every business. And this is something that we're seeing play out live in the marketplace. The banking industry's reaction has been a mixture of excitement and caution. For example, Morgan Stanley is one of the banner clients of GPT-4, using it to enhance internal knowledge base and federated search capabilities for its wealth management personnel, where in contrast, JP Morgan Chase, Italy, and more recently Samsung have temporarily restricted use of ChatGPT and other LLMs while they take the time to implement internal controls. The view in industry overall seems to be that this is an important but very addressable limitation, and that a great deal of progress can be made by adapting existing processes and systems around the strengths and limitations of these new technologies. I'd like to pause for a quick survey of folks on the line, so hopefully you're paying attention. Please send a thumbs up reaction on the ribbon or in chat if you've used ChatGPT or another LLM before, or if you know people in your organization who have. So you can just click at the sort of top bar of Teams. There's a little smiley react, or you can just use the chat interface like Cody just has. If it's just Cody, I'm going to be very surprised.
I saw a lot of thumbs up.
Got it. I see a raised hand from Travis. Is that your thumbs up, Travis, or is that a question?
No, that was my thumbs up.
Okay, great. All right, perfect. So now that we have a few responses there, please react with a smile emoji if your organization has policies or other controls in place around LLMs or AI. Or even if we can expand it to if that's been discussed. Travis, that's an apt response.
No, I literally just built up AI policy for work here and asked ChatGPT to make it better for me.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, work smarter, not harder. So you qualify now. Now you can say that you have a policy around it. You just have to do the work of communicating it out to the organization and getting everyone on board, right? The human adaptation is far slower than AI. In most things. So all this to illustrate that for most of you, it's a good bet that someone somewhere in your organization, whether or not you know about it, has been experimenting with using GPT or other LLMs to improve or expedite their work. this should be taken as promising, right? These people are your innovators. They're the ones who will be more able to learn and adapt to the coming shifts and future of work. With that said, it's important to make sure that no PII or proprietary data is leaked and that employees are using the tools in the right way and understand the limitations. So that's an area that we're seeing a lot of increased activity around. So to pull this back a little bit to sort of the so what, why should FIs care about this new technology? We've spoken generally about the broad capabilities of LLMs, but not as much of the specifics. And a lot of the value of large language models, at least in the short term, will come from improving a wide variety of tasks by a small amount, rather than from single use case style automation like you might see with robotic process automation or traditional conversational AI. To use Travis's example of having a first draft or having an improvement of an AI policy or a critique of something you put together, or helping you write a board report, helping to do repetitive communications that are nevertheless personalized. Many smaller tasks that are made faster and better through the applications of these technologies, just out of the box. With that said, with a lot of the value will be there in automating a larger number of those smaller use cases and kind of filling the cracks. But there are a number of bigger use cases for FIs that we've seen emerging. And I'll just skim over these, but if there's interest in more detail, I can elaborate at the end. So to call out a couple of these, Stripe, the payments company, has been investing really heavily in AI. They have more than 14 GPT-4 prototypes, including using it for help desk ticket routing and summary, and for detection of malicious actors on their community forums. PayPal and Block are also developing use cases for LLMs, and while they haven't provided as much detail as Stripe, PayPal's, I think, CEO said that he expects AI to speed product development, improve efficiency, and reduce overhead, and is an important component of their strategy. Training and education is one of the biggest areas we're seeing because large language models provide very close to a turnkey solution there with low customization needed and low consequences for errors. An exciting application to call out here is using large language models to simulate customer interactions, both to train frontline employees and to provide instantaneous, nearly free feedback on UX and communications, marketing, and so forth. In case you hadn't seen any news about it, these large language models are able to function in multiple languages, and this doesn't just mean German, Japanese. It also means code, right? So large language models are able to write, review, critique, and improve code, which has been tremendously accelerating most types of custom development, with applications basically as broad as software itself. And that's part of why we've seen a lot of recent downsizing from tech companies. Even PayPal, which I mentioned earlier, I think they recently did a 10 or 20% cut. So a lot of organizations, vendors that are heavy on development and are heavy on software engineering are slimming down substantially as a result of these tools. And there's also some rumblings in the marketplace around what this means for purchasing of large enterprise solutions versus building in-house. So having lower costs, quicker turnaround to building your own proprietary solution to a problem means that it should end up depressing vendor costs, right? Unless vendors are able to increase their value propositions adequately. This means that institutions that were really sort of on the threshold of building in-house versus buying out of the box, this may tip them over the edge to doing themselves, or may end up depressing the costs of vendor solutions such that they're more affordable. And we've also been hearing from SRM clients how they've been exploring these tools. FIs of all sizes, large and small, are seeing value in inexpensive, zero configuration, generalized automation and support tools to help them fill in the gaps around existing specialized vendor solutions. Right, you shouldn't expect LLMs to replace your loan origination system, for example. But cases where there's maybe a gap in the reporting, or where there needs to be some data analysis or interpretation or communication about the loans, or personalized communications with members or customers, it's those sorts of areas where we expect to see a lot of use initially. And just from my own experience helping FIs to evaluate use cases for robotic process automation, the more primitive rules-based automation method. For example, downloading rates reports from the internet, extracting the data, slotting it into custom Excel templates or databases. With LLMs, that could probably be done in one shot or close to it through low-cost tools built based on AutoGPT, basically hooking up large language models to the internet, having them plan courses of action, and then attempt to execute those courses of action. Which is, there's a lot of speculation about sort of what's going to happen there and how good those capabilities will get, which is a little bit of a deeper topic than we're likely to get into today. But even on sort of the low-hanging fruit end for simple use cases, there's a fair amount there, right? There's dozens of use cases like that where they're too small to merit dedicated and more expensive process automation efforts, which can be expedited or fully handled by large language models. And those are areas where FIs can realize gains extremely quickly, in less than a week, right? Effectively for free, because these tools remain still very inexpensive. And corresponding with all of this value that we're seeing in the marketplace, the demand for workers who are skilled with GPT and other LLMs has skyrocketed. Companies are expecting the incremental across the board gains from effective use of these new tools to add up, enabling elimination of jobs or growth without headcount expansion. And they're scrambling to hire expertise and educate existing personnel to be more efficient. One research report from OpenAI and the University of Pennsylvania suggests that approximately 80% of the US workforce could have at least 10% of their work tasks affected by the introduction of LLMs, while around 20% of workers may see at least 50% of their tasks impacted. And the estimates around this vary wildly. Some analysts predict full automation of more than 40% of all jobs within short timeframes, like 5 years. Something like that would predicate massive disruption and unemployment and unrest, which is part of why you see some personalities in the space talking about things like universal basic income, revised taxation schemes, and means of handling that sort of societal shift. In my view, it's still a little bit too early to predict how much automation the large language architecture will enable. But I do feel confident saying that LLMs are going to be embedded in so much of our work in the future that investing now in understanding their strengths, limitation, and potential will pay dividends well beyond the immediate gains. Consider how much of your workday you spend communicating, collecting, and consuming information, manipulating data, or making routine decisions. Very little of that is going away the second you start making use of LLMs, but almost all of it will be made better or more efficient in time. So learning to use a tool like ChatGPT now will enable you to use Microsoft Copilot in Word, Excel, Outlook more effectively later, as well as the plethora of paid and open source tools coming out every week. For example, if you want to do sentiment analysis and formula extrapolation in Excel, that's a capability that's available today, a free trial at a low use level through a third-party plugin, which has beaten Microsoft to the punch, right? So Microsoft has announced that they're going to be integrating GPT capabilities into the Office suite, but the startup and open source community hasn't been content to wait. And so there's an absolute explosion of tools available, all sort of competing for attention in market space, that are offering advanced capabilities at very low cost, easy to use. And it's still in the very early phases, right? But it's a sign of things to come. An effective use of large language models organizationally is currently a competitive advantage. As the numbers on this slide should show, right? It's highly sought after, but it's one which will pretty quickly become table stakes. The barriers to understanding and using these technologies are very low deliberately, right? The natural language interface means that basically anyone can ask for what they want. There are tips and tricks and like ways to get more out of them, and those ways can go fairly deep. But it's not as though people need to take a 6-week training course in order to make any use of this technology. It's not as though they need to have a developer mindset or to know code. And so FIs should be seeking to build expertise, set standards and controls, and explore these new capabilities as quickly as they can. So I'll pause here for questions and discussion. This is the core part of the presentation, like I mentioned at the beginning. I have some predictions, and I can go into more detail on pretty much any of the things I covered around how LLMs work, risks, depending on what there's interest in and time for. But yeah, at this point, I'll open it to questions.
Hey, Connor, I'll ask a really simple question. Could I look at, I mean, I think what you are saying is like ChatGPT supersedes things like RPA, it sounds like. And so as an institution that's still looking at RPA, should I be thinking about just leapfrogging over RPA and going straight here? Or is there a kind of a complementary service that each fulfill?
So that's going to be much more the latter. Large language models are, at least today, not really suitable for the same sort of UI layer automation, or at least the ways that LLMs would accomplish UI level automation, like RPA tools do, would be via RPA tools typically, or via direct like PowerShell scripts and code, right? And so it's something that RPA companies like UiPath, I have an appendix slide from their presentation that they gave, where they talked about sort of what their plans were for OpenAI and GPT. So these tools are absolutely going to be more integrated in the future. I guess you could think of it a little bit like large language models being the brain of an automation effort, and RPA being kind of the limbs of it. So RPA can form the means by which an LLM could potentially interact with applications on the desktop if it didn't have a direct integration. As where the place where it may leapfrog is if APIs get good enough, or just if enough of the applications you use have really good APIs and integrations, you might be able to have LLMs basically write custom software or scripts that you can run to directly interact with those applications to do what you would want to do with RPA in a potentially more reliable, more robust, and cheaper way. So I know that was a very long answer to a pretty short question, but hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And so just curious, what type of skill set is typically required to do something like that?
You mean to
wrap? Yeah, I mean to essentially, wrap ChatGPT around, use it as the brains. How would you leverage that, or do you have to be a technical person to? I know, like on the surface, you probably don't have to be a technical person to use ChatGPT, but do you, in order to make something useful out of it, I guess, using something like RPA, or, do you need to develop a specific skill set? I don't know, maybe my question is too complicated or too intertwined.
It's not exactly a skill set. I would say you would want to have some level of expertise with RPA. I mean, some knowledge of what it's good and not good for, to be, I mean, as with like just about everything you would use an LLM for today, you need to have expert oversight. You need to have someone with subject matter expertise who's able to validate that what it's producing makes sense and works, right? And that's why it's not really replacing developers directly as it is helping developers code a lot faster, so you need fewer of them, if that makes sense, right? So it's not replacing things end to end. And so for the case of like, how would you set up RPA using LLM as sort of the guidance? Having tried to use GPT to write automation scripts for Microsoft Power Automate, I figured I'd have a little bit better luck with that than UiPath, given they're now, I guess, in a way, have the same owner. And it was able to provide advice as far as like how to create the code. It's sort of like an assistant who knows the tool better, giving you guidance on how you can do what you're trying to do. But as far as being able to directly like produce code that's runnable by an automation software, you would probably need to customize a model. You need to fine tune an LLM model with a bunch of UiPath code and enough reinforcement learning around it that it would be able to output that successfully. And even then, you would still need your SMEs to sort of validate, tweak, touch it up, make it run. So it can shorten that cycle. I wouldn't say it's like end to end, but I would say I expect that UiPath and other RPA companies are both sweating and working on building those capabilities into their offerings. So that's one of those things where, depending on the scope and scale of your use cases, I would probably think it would be inefficient to chase immediately, but I would keep a close eye on the vendor space to see what they're doing and how soon that might be coming. And if there's enough value behind it, and there may well be some startup working on this as well, then it would be around fine-tuning a model, packaging it, and building in the appropriate sort of review layers and iterative cycles to make that work effectively.
Okay, so yeah, I think that was a missing piece in my head, is the model really is the interface between systems, it sounds like, essentially, and that needs to be built out.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. It's the LLMs are an extremely general framework, right? Anything from writing jokes to interpreting what a robot is seeing and helping it plan what it should do to put a bunch of trash in a trash can, to writing code, right? So it's, in order to make it really useful in a domain, you need to, well, I mean, it's really useful in a lot of domains out of the box, which is part of what's so revolutionary about this new architecture. But generally speaking, the more niche the application, the less it's something that's happening really commonly globally across the internet. Because that's the majority of GPT's training data, right? Is a selective internet crawl. The less likely GPT is to be able to do a really expert job at it.
Connor, we had a question from Simon.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, Connor, great presentation. Stimulate a little bit of debate along the lines. Thank you for that, because I learned quite a lot. But you talk a little bit about what the sort of longevity is, the whole path of this process. It feels like there's lots going on. There's lots of companies, lots of innovation going on. It almost feels like it's bursting for some kind of consolidation, and almost that in the end getting towards that VHS Betamax kind of approach, and what that sort of likelihood might be in terms of impact on businesses that are already trying to consume some of this AI and capabilities from various different, even the small firms and the larger firms, what the impact might be on that sort of consolidation, and then maybe that implosion, if you like, into the VHS Betamax kind of phase. Or maybe I'm getting ahead of myself on that.
There's a few things to say here. I mean, the broadest answer is that no one really knows yet. The fight is ongoing for different standards, right? I mean, once ChatGPT took off, Google more or less immediately panicked and released Bard before it was ready, because they felt that it was a really legitimate threat to their core business to search. And we have other companies like Anthropic out there. We have Meta getting out there with their Llama model, and also the competition from open source. So open source is something I haven't really touched on in this presentation, but some of you may have seen the memo from a Google employee that basically hypothesizes that open source is going to eat their lunch and OpenAI's lunch. Looking at the sort of pace of progress in terms of efficiency and model fine-tuning and localization, overall sort of scale and performance, the level of advancement that the open source community achieved in a short time, this Google employee saw as really threatening and potentially becoming the new standard or pushing Google and OpenAI out of the market. Because if people can train their own custom model from something that's open source from free, something that's free open source, for relatively cheaply, they can run it on pretty cheap hardware. What need do they have to buy subscription services or to pay for usage on these big proprietary models? So there's a lot of ongoing questions around kind of where will this settle out. What I can say is, the big players right now, the ones you hear most about are OpenAI, Google, and open source with Anthropic somewhere, in that kind of 4 or 5, and then a number of other startups who are working on this in other ways. And no one quite knows where and how it's going to shake out. As far as how this will impact enterprises that are using large language models or that are investing in creating capabilities based on them, really it depends on what they're using them for, right? If you're just pulling up your browser and you're asking GPT to do things, or if you're engaging in prompt engineering to try to get better outputs, none of that will really change, right? It doesn't matter that much which solution you're using. They work close enough to the same that really it's just it shouldn't make a difference to the use cases. If you are doing something more involved, like having a fine-tuned air-gapped instance on like a private cloud that you've customized specifically for your institution so that it can answer customer questions accurately. If you've built something substantial like that, and then the standard changes, if you have a model like that and it's working for you, it's going to continue working for you. It doesn't really matter if the market winner is someone else. In the same way that you might end up falling behind the state of the art or not have access to the newest, shiniest capabilities if you have an on-prem version of a software when the company is more aggressively updating their cloud version, or if you have a vendor software which the vendor goes out of business or is acquired and it's not supported as well, it'll really be a similar situation to that, I suspect, right? So it's not going to be crippling unless you are actively involved in a business that's building on top of one of these offerings and it is reliant on it for your core product. If you're just a consumer of the technology, I wouldn't expect it to make a huge dent. And that ties into my first prediction here as far as what'll happen. We're in kind of a frenzy right now. There's a huge amount of investment. There's tons of new solutions, tons of startups, VCs throwing money around. And I think, like with most things, like with the crypto and Web3 bubble of a year or so ago, I think probably more than 50% of new startups will pivot or exit in the next few years. That's not to say that this is a bubble and it's going to go away and no one will be talking about it in 2 years. No, this really is something that will be built into all kinds of things that we're using today and will enable new capabilities. It's just that right now there's far, far more startups and offerings than is really sustainable. And that's just the natural cycle for startups and for these sort of investment waves. And that's happened with AI a few different times. So it'll just be, investment will cool down a little bit, get a little bit more focused on the startups which are producing value, which have clear, clear avenues to monetization, which are gaining traction. Really the standard sort of startup life cycle, but quick up, quick down, as with everything that's happening right now. But it's not going to go away. Other questions, or should I keep running through predictions?
Keep going with predictions, Connor. I'm soaking this up like a sponge, man.
Great. All right. I'll keep going. So this one is hard to say, and it's one of those sorts of predictions that is risky to put out in public, because you never know when you're going to get egg on your face with this. But I don't expect more sort of broadly, globally revolutionary change from the LLM architecture, in the near future, right? This revolution with ChatGPT, the explosion of users, everything's being built right now. That's really about the interface, accessibility, training methodology, and democratization of large language models capabilities. The core technology and architecture have remained effectively the same for the last while. There have been some innovations. Multimodal AI is newer, and some of the things that are achieved with GPT-4, but it's not the same sort of tidal shift as when this architecture was first developed. I think it was, I've heard it attributed to a Google product from, I want to say, 2014 or 2015, and it was really just that it wasn't built out enough, and it wasn't made accessible or hooked up, or given the right amount of effort, scale, and training data to show the performance that it does today. That said, I do expect incremental progress from this, fast progress. But the value that we're going to see, and what all of these startups really are targeting, is more in the applications and integrations of the GPT technology. Right, it's building it into all of our existing software and workflows to make them better and more capable, and making AI capabilities turnkey in every domain where it has value to do so. LLMs will get better at doing everything they already do, and will become more widespread with us re-engineering processes and roles around them. And that's what I expect the next sort of 2 to 5 years to focus primarily on. Who's to say? Who knows? Maybe next week, Sam Altman will go back on what he said and announce GPT-5, and it'll be, absolutely wild, completely different. But I don't expect that to happen, just sort of based on the shape of past innovations in this space, right? I mean, RPA capabilities were around for a long time before UiPath made them accessible, commercialized them, made them more effective, matched them up with the use cases and the problems and the integrations. And so I think that's a lot of what we're seeing now. Another item, spam, phishing, and fraud. Attacks are going to get more sophisticated and more personalized on average, and spam filters will be evolving alongside them. And we're already seeing some of this happen. SRM clients report escalating fraud since around December. I personally don't think that the proximity to ChatGPT's release there is coincidence. In the same way that large language models make personalized marketing at scale cheap and accessible, they and subsequent open source and specialized models do the same for phishing and other types of social engineering. They also, with the sort of naturalistic translation capabilities that they offer and the voice synthesis, helps to further reduce the language barrier, which has traditionally been an obstacle to fraud. And speaking of the language barrier, I wouldn't be at all surprised to see offshore contact centers using near real-time AI accent removal in the near future. And just generally speaking, cases where offshoring is made more difficult by the language barrier, those will probably be somewhat mitigated in the future. There's one that Larry actually called my attention to. That one of the sort of core applications for banking for AI and these capabilities is automation of aspects of audit and compliance. AI can do a fair amount of sort of rote work and checks and evaluation easily, quickly, and autonomously, and that opens up the potential for a future where banks have live data feeds that are connected directly to regulators. Right? If anything gets off balance, the AI can pick it up, and regulator and bank leaders will know immediately, rather than having this sort of quarterly, biannual, annual review cycle that's more common today. Something else is monetization of AI capabilities. So OpenAI really set the expectation for the marketplace by releasing a free tool, which currently costs it something like $700,000 a day to run. It has monetization in place, of course, with the subscription and pay-by-use models for the API, but we're still in the very early days of value capture for large language models. I expect in the future we'll have much more sophisticated monetization schemes, especially if large language model facilitated search becomes the norm. There's already discussions in industry about AI search engine optimization. So, SEO, but for AI, if we move to an AI infrastructure for search, and if and how ads will be incorporated is an open but very hot question. The trend with new mass market digital platforms, everything from Facebook to eBay to TikTok, is to launch with a strong initial value proposition for both buyers and sellers of the marketplace, and then to capture more and more of the value from both sides over time once the platform is entrenched with users. And we should expect to see this happen with LLMs. It's just a question of when and how. And then finally, AI will fuel a tremendous amount of content creation, right? It lowers the barriers to entry for creating quality content. That's informational YouTube videos, works of art, blogs, books. I can't tell you the number of new AI blogs which I've seen crop up just in the last 2 weeks. Right? GPT can act as a ghostwriter and an editor in many domains. And while by default, you'll find using GPT for these things, as I have a lot of what it produces is kind of bland and archetypical. It's kind of like the most, it's like the quintessence of a given category, like the most average answer that you could get that is still complete and robust. But it doesn't take a lot of tweaking to get interesting and compelling content in most cases. And there are a lot of people and a lot of entities which are doing a lot of tweaking and producing custom tuned models to help write more compelling articles, to help create art more easily, because it's really not that hard to take the base model and get it to produce much better results, particularly for creative domains where you don't have the same sort of compliance and data security risks. So as much as we've had kind of an age of content and an attention economy in the last decade, this will only sort of fuel even more of that. So that's all I've got for the public predictions here. Happy to field any questions on these. Certainly, there are other predictions I have that are lower confidence or more emerging, speculative type stuff. But these are the ones that I'm willing to put my name on at this point in time. Yeah, any thoughts, questions, discussion? I know we got about 10 minutes. If folks are interested in a little bit more about how the LLM architecture differs from older approaches, I can go over that. Could talk more about risk. If people are worried about Skynet, I can cover that.
Hey, Connor.
Yeah,
Connor, if folks want to contact you or get more information on the topic, what's the best way?
Thank you, Larry. It's on the bottom of this slide, so please just send an email to techtalks@SRM Corp. Additionally, my contact information is on the first slide of this deck, and you can reach out to me directly. as well. And the recording of this will be sent out afterwards. So if you missed the beginning, you didn't get to see AI Morgan Freeman, then never fear, you'll have a chance.
Connor, this was outstanding, and truly appreciate your insight on this and keeping on top of this fast-moving topic. I'll pause and see if anyone has any questions, but really do appreciate everyone's time and attention on this, and we're looking forward to bringing a lot of new topics, whether that's kind of cloud-based core, new digital banking platforms, FedNow. We've got a lot of great speakers coming up, and really looking forward to everyone's participation. And feel free to share the link with others if people need permissions to get those links. Just have them reach out to me, and I'll make sure that we permission it appropriately. Any last-minute questions?
Connor, great job. I did have a quick question, and just out of curiosity. So, it wasn't so well. It seems like it was forever ago, but it wasn't that long ago when the government got involved with the net neutrality and trying to argue that and figure out how to create, how to regulate the internet, basically. So, from a regulatory standpoint over AI, because it can be such a convincing tool if not used in the right hands. Like, and I've seen like different states across the U.S. are putting legislation forth for like deep fake and pornography and certain ads and things like that. Is there anything I see Larry put in Congress is going to be meeting about this next week about AI? Like, is there anything that you're seeing as far as regulations go right now with this technology?
I mean, very little in the way of released regulation. I mean, Italy blocked ChatGPT for a few months before deciding that it was missing the boat and reversed that decision. Right, and so we have seen some kind of unilateral action by nations and governments to do things about this. But broadly speaking, I think what Larry said kind of encompasses it. Like, Congress is just really starting to talk about this, right? I mean, Congress has been talking about AI and has, I think there's some kind of AI risk committee since the Obama era. But it's very much in like the earliest days of kind of milling around, Congress trying to even understand, what this is, how it's different, what it does. So I think regulation is probably still farther off on the horizon. There are some governmental groups which have been a little bit quicker on the punch, and that's the slide that I have up now. NIST released, National Institute of Standards and Technology, released a risk management framework that was pretty good. It wasn't, I'd say as specific. They have a lot of kind of boilerplate, which they use for a lot of different technologies, but overall, I mean, I would say going in the right direction. And so they released that guidance, I want to say in March. It might even have been February, but it's been around for a bit. So, there's guidance out there, there's discussions, but I haven't seen much, in the way of actually pen to paper on it yet.
Got it. Thank you.
Well, if there isn't anything additional, I want to thank everyone. I know we're at the top of the hour for joining. Look forward to hopefully our next one in 2 weeks, and we will send out the recording to everyone. Thanks again to Connor for leading this.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks, everyone.
Nice job, Connor.
Good job, man.
Awesome.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Take care.